That's what living with a stutter is. It's moving from one social situation to the next, afraid of that next attack.
You may have heard the term stuttering before, and you may know it has to do with the difficulty speaking. But you may not know that stuttering is a lot more than problems pronouncing words. See, in a typical definition, stuttering is defined as talking with involuntary repetition of sounds, especially in this initial consonant. Just like this example, the child was stuttering in fright. See, this implies that this is one incident or one event. We are talking about people who stutter consistently, or stutterers, who are affected by a biological and neurological condition. Common words associated with stutterers include shame, anxiety, stress, and even unable. So where do people get these stereotypes? About 1% of the entire population has a stutter, which is about 3 million people in the USA. So it's possible that you know someone who stutters. Some popular names associated with stuttering include Ed Sheeran, Marilyn Monroe, and James Earl Jones. But these names may not remind you of adjectives like shame and unable. So where do they come from? Well, to answer this, take a look at a clip from the popular 1998 film, The Waterboy.
Man, Captain Insano. Now let's take a call. It's our old friend from Jackson's Bayou, Mr. B.
Hello, Jim. Is it possible to speak to Captain Insano?
Shoot, Mr. B.
Captain Insano, I notice sometimes when you are wrestling or opening up a can of whoop ass, as you like to say, you seem to be sweating quite profusely.
Yeah?
I was wondering if perhaps you might need the services of an experienced water boy.
That's pretty cute. How old are you, kid? 11? 12?
I'm 31 years old.
As you can see from this clip, Bobby Boucher has a hard time speaking with a constant flow, and he stutters on several instances during the call. The problem does not lie in the fact that he says things awkwardly. Rather, it's a combination of what he says and how he says it. Though this movie is not about stuttering per se, it is so apparent because it is such an obvious part of the character. Bobby has other characteristics too, such as him being socially inept and possibly having an intellectual disorder of some kind. When you combine these traits with his stuttering, viewers may unknowingly form a stereotype that connects his stutter to his other characteristics. Everyday stutterers do not act like Bobby Boucher, but if you have never met a stutterer in real life, you may group them into this myth that says that people who stutter are socially awkward and maybe less intelligent. We know this to not be true, but this kind of exposure can alter your implicit bias to these characteristics.
The movie The King's Speech helps to dispel the stereotype that people who stutter are less intelligent than people who don't stutter.
What are you doing? Get up! You can't sit there! Get up!
Why not? It's a chair.
No, that is not a chair. That is St. Edward's chair.
People have
that
carved their names on it.
Chair is the seat on which every king
It's held
and
in
queen...
place by a large rock.
That is the stone of Scone. You are trivializing
you can
everything.
believe all that,
You
Bunsen.
trivialize...
I don't care how many royal
Listen to me.
arseholes have sat in
Listen
this
to me!
chair.
Listen to me!
Listen to you by what right?
By divine right, if you must. I'm your king.
No, you're not. You told me so yourself. You said you didn't want it. Why should I waste my time listening to
Because
you?
I have a right to be,
Heard
and I
what?
have a voice!
Yes, you do.
To spread awareness in the community, I handed out stuttering fact sheets to people in my dorm. The facts included that stuttering is a biological and neurological condition, and that 4 out of 10 people who stutter have been denied a job, promotion, or school opportunity because of stuttering.
We had surveyed 43 subjects about the myths and their current knowledge on stutters. 42 of the people polled had known that stutters do not define a person's intellect. Yet, unfortunately, the public had believed that stutters are caused by nervousness and/or stress. As we know, this is not the case. Stutters can be a result of a person's genetics, child development, neurophysiology, and/or family dynamics. A majority of participants had also thought that advising someone with a stutter to slow down would be helpful, when in actuality, that is not the answer. When the public was asked if they had seen stuttering portrayed in the media, many had responded yes, from TV shows and movies, and multiple responses included stuttering being used as comedic relief, which is unrealistic and contributes to current stereotypes in place. Many participants attributed feelings of shame and frustration with having a stutter. But let's see, from first-hand account, David Connor, who ever so nicely agreed to answer our questions on what it's actually like to have a stutter.
So I'm here with David Connor, and we're going to ask him some questions about how it is to live with a stutter. All right, David, how do you explain stuttering to others, if you get the chance?
Well, it's interesting that I guess I rarely get the chance, that it's an interesting part of our culture that we really don't discuss differences. We don't point them out, that we tend to ignore them, that even when it's obvious or descriptive, that we ignore it. And this became very clear to me. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa in the 90s and spoke a local language there, and I would stutter in that language as I stutter in any language I speak. And very often they would just be amazed at that. Like, look, the white guy also stutters, that it never occurred to them that white people might stutter. I guess they didn't see a lot of white people, but just the idea that anything that's descriptive there, they'll mention it, and they'll point out differences in that way, whereas in our culture it's much more invisible. It's not something that we discuss. Really the only time I do get to describe it is with children. And just for example, last night I'm my daughter's Little League coach, and one of the kids said, "Why do you talk like that?" And I was able to explain that it's called stuttering, and that's just the way I talk. Certain people do different things. Some are tall or short, some walk with a limp, and that it's just the way I talk. And with most kids, they just said, "Oh, really wasn't a big deal at all."
Some positive reactions. How do you feel? How do you feel others perceive you when you stutter? When you hear?
I guess that I'm not going to exactly answer your question, but really the only hard part of stuttering is the emotional part of it, the fear of stuttering, of not being fluent, feeling ashamed, being embarrassed by it. That's really the only hard part. And I do notice that sometimes well-meaning people do things like complete sentences for me, or say, "Well, just spit it out," or "slow down," or things that I know they're well-meaning and trying to be helpful, but actually end up not being particularly helpful.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel to have a stutter? We kind of touched on this.
I did. So, yeah, there are times when I hardly notice it. There are times when I do notice it. Certainly in front of family, good friends, loved one. It's really not anything I think about much. Mm-hmm. I've been able to overcome my fear of public speaking or speaking on a recorder like this, which I'll note is extremely uncomfortable for people who stutter.
Thank you.
So I get credit for taking one for the team, I hope. So just, I guess it's something that I just have to persevere through. One of the things that helps a lot is I go to a support group sponsored by the National Stuttering Association and the Luce Center here at UVM, and it's a support group for adults who stutter, and it's just been incredibly helpful to not feel alone, to have a place where I know my speech is not being judged, where I can practice fluency techniques. And it's interesting that no time in my life am I more fluent than in those meetings. So it's also sort of refreshing to have an opportunity to actually be the most fluent that I can be.
It's great that you have this support. Do you feel stutters are accurately portrayed in the media? Let's talk about that.
So I feel like mostly, as with so many other human anomalies, they're invisible. That it's very rare that you ever see a person who stutters in a movie on TV. And when they are, it's sort of a stereotype of a person who stutters, that it becomes, this is a person who stutters instead of just this is a person. And I think that there was a long time critique of that, people of color or LGBTIQ people or even women tended to be typecast into certain roles, and the role became sort of the stereotype of that. So I would love to see more people who stutter be, in movies and on TV and just portrayed as a person instead of making the story about the stutter.
How do you think we can open up the conversation to kind of debunk the stereotype?
Yeah, I think things like this.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the work that the Luce Center does, having gatherings of people who stutter, just getting more aware that we're out there. Because before I started to go to these meetings, I knew very, very few other people who stutter and felt very alone in it. And it's really feels good to know that I'm not alone. And I think the more that there's a public face and the more that people see that we're out there, we're in all walks of life, that it'll make all of us more comfortable, and therefore I think the more comfortable that we are, the more fluent that we are.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.